Somewhere out there is an old farmhouse where the people moved away decades ago. The porch is caved in, the fence is gone, and every single spring, like clockwork, a row of peonies along the foundation explodes into hundreds of fat, fragrant blooms. No one waters them, no one feeds them, no one even remembers planting them. Meanwhile, somewhere right now, there's a gardener kneeling over a peony they bought 2 years ago, one they've watered faithfully and fertilized every month, begging it to give them just one flower. And it won't. So what does that abandoned farmhouse know that the careful gardener doesn't? That's exactly what you're about to find out. By the end of this video, you're going to understand why peonies are quietly one of the toughest, longest living plants you can ever put in the ground. Some of them outlive the people who planted them, blooming for 50, 80, even 100 years, and why the ones that fail almost always fail for the same handful of fixable reasons. I'm going to walk you through 5 secrets that turn a peony into a plant you can practically ignore and still get showered with flowers every single spring. Not vague tips you've heard 100 times, the real reasons. Stay with me because the very first one is the single most common mistake people make, and it's the reason most peonies never bloom at all. Secret 1. Plant them shallow, almost suspiciously shallow. Here's the truth that nobody tells you when you buy a peony, and it's responsible for more disappointed gardeners than anything else on this list. You can do everything else perfectly. Perfect soil, perfect sun, perfect watering, and if you get this one thing wrong, your peony will grow lush green leaves year after year and never, ever flower. Peonies need to be planted shallow. When you look at a bare root peony, you'll see little reddish or pinkish buds on the crown. Those are called the eyes, and they're where next year's stems and flowers come from. The rule that changes everything is this. Those eyes should sit no more than 1 to 2 inches below the surface of the soil. That's it, barely covered. If you're in a colder northern region, you can lean toward 2 inches. In a warmer area, stay closer to 1. Now here's where almost everyone goes wrong. We've all been trained by every other plant we've ever grown to dig a deep hole and bury things securely. It feels right. It feels like you're tucking the plant in for safety. But with a peony, planting deep is a quiet death sentence for the flowers. Bury those eyes 3, 4, 5 inches down, and the plant survives just fine. It'll send up leaves and look perfectly healthy, but it interprets that depth as a signal that it isn't ready to bloom. You get all foliage and no payoff, sometimes for years, sometimes forever. So if you take nothing else from this entire video, take this: plant shallow. Keep those eyes just under the surface and resist every instinct telling you to bury them deeper. And if you already have a peony that's refusing to bloom and you suspect it's planted too deep, don't panic. We'll come back to that, because moving a peony is its own conversation and it leads straight into the second secret. Quick one if you actually want a step-by-step guide for all this. Maybe your plant's struggling or you just can't get it to bloom. I put every fix into one cheat sheet. You get everything in my Plant Fix and Bloom cheat sheet. It's the first link in the description. Let's continue. Secret 2. Stop touching them. Neglect is the strategy. Remember that abandoned farmhouse? Here's its biggest secret. Nobody has touched those peonies in 40 years, and that's not despite the neglect, it's because of it. Peonies are one of the rare plants in your garden that genuinely reward you for leaving them alone. Most plants you fuss over, you move around, you divide, you relocate to a better spot when they're not thriving. With peonies, every single time you do that, you set the plant back. They send their roots down deep and wide, building a thick, fleshy root system that takes its time getting established. Disturb that, and you've reset the clock. This is why patience is the entire game in the first few years. A newly planted peony will often spend its first year or two doing almost nothing impressive above ground. You might get a few weak stems and maybe one shy flower, or no flowers at all. This is completely normal, and it is not a sign that something is wrong. The plant is pouring its energy underground, building the engine that will run for the next several decades. Year 3 is usually when it starts to show off. Year 5 is when it becomes the thing your neighbors stop and stare at. So when your young peony looks underwhelming, the worst thing you can do is decide it's in the wrong spot and dig it up to move it. You'll just start the waiting period all over again. Pick a good location once. Full sun, 6 hours or more, with soil that drains well so the roots never sit in standing water, and then commit to it. Plant it and walk away. If you absolutely must move one, or you need to fix one that was planted too deep, do it in the fall, never the spring, and accept that the plant will likely sulk and skip blooming the following year while it recovers. But the honest advice is this: choose well the first time and then let the neglect do its work. Peonies don't want a hovering gardener. They want to be forgotten in a good spot. Secret 3. Feed them less and feed them the right thing. This is the secret that feels completely backwards, and it's the one that traps the careful, loving gardeners, the exact opposite of that abandoned farmhouse. When a plant isn't blooming, our instinct is to feed it. More fertilizer, more nutrients, more help. So people reach for that all-purpose, high-nitrogen lawn and garden feed and pour it on, expecting an explosion of flowers. What they get instead is an explosion of leaves. Big, green, lush, beautiful foliage, and barely a bloom in sight. Here's why. Nitrogen, the first of the 3 numbers on any fertilizer bag, drives leafy green growth. Flood a peony with nitrogen and you're basically ordering it to make leaves at the expense of everything else. What peonies actually want for flowering is phosphorus and potassium, the 2nd and 3rd numbers, and they want them in modest amounts. The fix is simple and cheap. In the fall, scratch a little bone meal or a low-nitrogen bloom-focused fertilizer around the plant, keeping it off the crown itself. Bone meal is naturally rich in phosphorus and releases slowly, which suits a plant that does its real work underground over a long stretch of time. A single light feeding in autumn is genuinely all an established peony needs for the entire year. You do not need to feed it monthly. You do not need to feed it in summer. Overfeeding doesn't help a peony. It actively works against the flowers you're trying to get. So, feed lightly, feed in fall, and choose phosphorus over nitrogen. Less really is more, and the farmhouse peonies getting 0 fertilizer and blooming their heads off are the living proof.
Secret 4. Cut everything to the ground in fall and throw it away. Now we get to the secret that does the most invisible good. The one that quietly prevents the single most common disease that takes down peonies before their time. The disease is called botrytis, a fungal blight that shows up as blackened, wilting buds that never open, browning leaves, and rotting stems near the base. It thrives in cool, damp conditions, and once it gets a foothold, it comes back stronger every year, because the fungus overwinters right there in the old dead foliage left standing through the cold months. That dead growth is a reservoir, and every spring it reinfects the fresh new shoots coming up. The fix takes about 10 minutes once a year, and it's the closest thing peonies have to essential maintenance. In late fall, after the first frost has knocked the leaves down and the foliage has yellowed and died back naturally, cut every stem all the way down to ground level. Don't leave stubs. Then, and this part matters, gather up all that cut foliage and remove it completely. Don't compost it. Don't leave it lying around the base of the plant. Bag it and throw it out, or burn it if you're allowed to. You're physically removing the fungal spores before they can settle in for winter and ambush next year's growth. That's the whole job. One clean cut to the ground, one good cleanup, done. Skip it and you might get away with it for a while, but you're slowly stacking the odds against your plant. Do it every fall and you break the disease cycle before it ever starts. It's the most reliable thing you can do to keep a peony healthy for the long haul, and it costs you a few minutes once a year. And while we're talking about things that look alarming but aren't a problem, let's clear up the ants. You'll see ants crawling all over your peony buds in spring, and a lot of people panic and reach for the bug spray. Don't. The ants are simply there for the sweet nectar the buds produce, and they do no harm at all to the plant. The flowers open with or without them. Leave the ants alone, brush them off the cut stems if you bring blooms indoors, and don't waste a moment worrying about them. Secret 5. Let them feel the cold. Winter is a feature, not a threat. Here's the secret that explains why some people simply cannot get peonies to bloom no matter what they do, and why others have to do almost nothing. It comes down to one thing most gardeners never think about. Peonies need to feel winter.
Peonies have a built-in requirement for a stretch of genuine cold each year. The plant has to go fully dormant and experience a real run of chilly weather before it will set flower buds for the coming spring. Think of it as a reset the plant needs in order to know that winter has passed and it's safe to bloom. Without enough cold, the internal signal never fires, and you get a plant that grows leaves but stubbornly refuses to flower, not because you did anything wrong, but because the climate never gave it the trigger it's waiting for. This is wonderful news if you live somewhere with real winters, because it means the cold you might think of as a hardship is exactly what your peonies are craving. You don't need to protect them, wrap them, or bring them in. The freeze is doing essential work. In fact, a thick layer of mulch piled too generously over the crown can sometimes insulate it enough to dull that cold signal, so keep mulch light and pulled back from the center of the plant once it's established. If you live in a warmer region with mild winters, this is the secret that saves you a lot of heartbreak because it tells you to choose differently from the start. Look specifically for low-chill peony varieties bred to bloom with less cold, and plant them shallow, back to secret 1, so the crown can catch every bit of cool air that does come through. Match the plant to your climate instead of fighting your climate, and you stop blaming yourself for something that was never about your effort. So don't fear the cold for your peonies. Welcome it. It's the quiet partner doing half the work, the same way it's been doing for those farmhouse flowers for the last 100 years. Step back and look at what these 5 secrets actually have in common, because the pattern is the real lesson. Plant them shallow, leave them alone, feed them lightly, clean them up once a year, let them feel winter. Almost every one of these is about doing less, not more. The peony isn't a needy plant, it's a patient, ancient, deeply tough one that asks for a good start and then mostly wants to be left to its own business. The gardeners who struggle are usually the ones loving their peonies too hard, planting them deep, moving them around, drowning them in fertilizer, fussing over the ants. The abandoned farmhouse blooms because nobody got in the plant's way. Get these 5 things right, and you won't just have a peony that survives, you'll have one that's still blooming long after you've forgotten you ever worried about it. A plant you could genuinely neglect and still be rewarded by every single spring for decades. So here's what I want you to do. If you've got a peony that's been refusing to bloom, go check how deep it's planted, because there's a very good chance that's your whole problem right there. And if you found these secrets useful, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. We put out simple, no-nonsense guides like this for the plants that should be easy but somehow never feel that way. Drop a comment and tell me, how long has your oldest peony been blooming? I'd love to hear how many of you have one of those decades-old plants that just refuses to quit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.